Today on the show, I'm so excited to share this beautiful interview with the novelist Heidi Reimer, whose debut, The Mother Act, was reviewed in the New York Times. I hope you're inspired as I was hearing about Heidi's path to publication and how she kept believing in her work through obstacles. She shares some really important ways to navigate author visibility too. Be sure to stick around to the end for Heidi's most effective daily writing practice. I'm Suzanne Alyssa Andrew, and this is Stardust and Courage, the podcast where we use writing, curiosity, and imagination to see beyond challenges and make life more meaningful. It's mindful writing to go deeper, grow, and imagine. And I'm so very glad you're here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, Heidi, and welcome to Stardust and Courage. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start talking about your process from the very beginning. And I was curious about, what's your earliest memory of writing or wanting to write?
I was a child. I almost don't remember not writing. I do have a specific memory of telling my mother when I was 8 that I was going to be a writer. This is what I was going to do with my life. But that was after I had already spent maybe years just writing stories in notebooks and writing novels, or my version of novels. It was the most magical, perfect thing in the world to me. I loved reading, and so it was just a natural extension of that to immerse in a story, but be the one making it. Just felt like, seriously, the best thing you could possibly be engaged in. Like, it was all I wanted to do.
That's amazing. Were you always a reader?
I was always a reader. And then, the type of kid who always was deep in a book. And as soon as one finished, the next one started. Like, my mother would hide books from me because it was all I would do. She'd be like, you're getting it back after you do your chores, or, I was obsessed.
I was the type of kid who stayed up late reading under the covers with a flashlight when I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah.
And then what was your writing and reading experience in high school? Did you stick with it then?
I was always writing. I was always writing and reading. I wrote pretty prolifically all through my childhood and my adolescence, and freely. Those were years when writing was fun. It was what I was doing because I loved it. I had goals for it, but I didn't feel any pressure around those goals while I was still a kid and a teenager. It was when I considered myself to be now I'm a young adult and I'm supposed to, do something with my life. That's when the pressure was on and writing became hard, really hard.
So about what age was that? In your 20s?
I would say 19, 20, 21. That's when the shift was happening, probably 19. I decided I was a grown-up who needed to be producing her life's work by then, and started putting the pressure on myself, and sort of felt like, well, I've spent all these years doing this and saying it's what I want to do and who I am, and now I felt like I had to produce some proof of that in more than just these fun stories and novel attempts that I wrote for myself. Yeah.
So what happened to all the writing from your 20s?
I have a novel that I produced in that time.
Oh, wow.
Very painfully. I gave it to my mother about 10 years ago for Christmas, like a bound copy of it, because it will never be published. It will never be read. But I figured my mom's coming up a lot in this story. I thought she would appreciate it. So it exists. I made it to the end, but it was a very painful experience. I was trying to follow the rules. I was sort of very focused on results from the first word. It immobilized me in terms of, I was just really in my own way and really in my head and really have to prove that I can write a novel now and be serious and funny enough, that got in the way of creative exploration and discovery and joy and playfulness and all of those sparkly things.
Right. Yeah. So what did it take to get the joy back?
I actually went through a process of undoing, my ideas about what good writing was, what a good story was, what a good sentence was, allowing myself to be messy. It was difficult because, a perfectionist, overthinker, the ways that I was getting in my own way were because I wanted control. And so learning to let go of control on the page and allow myself to not know the outcome and just explore. But I read people like Julia Cameron and Anne Lamott and, write shitty first drafts and follow your intuition. And just, I was sort of going through a period of letting go of a lot of the rules and boundaries and structure in my life on multiple levels. And so it went hand in hand in that. But I do think I went too far in the opposite direction and got lost in the wilderness of anything goes, do whatever, like follow your characters wherever they lead. And then there wasn't enough structure. And so, it seems very obvious, like, well, you need a balance, but it was not obvious in my personal experience of grappling with how to actually produce a viable novel and how to show up day after day to a writing practice. So I swung between both sides of that pendulum, and the practice that finally enabled me to start getting traction, but without immobilizing myself with rules and fears and blocks, was this kind of middle way of freedom inside a framework and intuition and instinct and all that beautiful flowy stuff, but with some framework, with some structure, with some understanding of story structure, and with some, commitment to a writing practice, which for years I didn't have because it was just like, oh, write when I feel like it. Yeah, I would say it's all about balance. For me, it's been all about balance.
I love that idea of freedom within a framework. That seems really positive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've heard it described as riverbanks on a river. If you don't have the banks, then you just have water everywhere. And if that's creative flow, say, if the river is representing creative flow, you need to be able to guide it and channel it somewhere, somehow, for it to be useful and productive and be something that you can actually harness into the shape of a novel that's going to work on a narrative level and be readable and propulsive and all of those good things.
Right. Now, you recently published your first debut novel, The Mother Act, but it wasn't the first novel that you wrote.
It was not. It was not even the second, if we count that one I wrote in my 20s that my mother has. So I got my agent with a different novel. I guess the way to count it, I have a hard time counting how many novels I've actually written because there are some that I spent years and years on, but never made it to the end of what we could say was a draft. But there was one that I completed and revised and edited and landed a literary agent with. So that novel was what I thought was going to be my first published novel. And it did get me my agent, which is amazing. And it didn't sell when it went out to publishers. But fortunately, and this is something that I have learned is essential to me, I was already deep into another creative project, which was the Mother Act, when that sort of failure to find a home was finally, like, we were sort of hitting the road and saying, my agent was telling me, okay, looks like this is not happening now. And so because I was already deep into the Mother Act and had almost, it wasn't a completed draft, but it was pretty substantial. My creative energy was there. My creative sort of spark and inspiration and hopes and joys were all being poured into the current creative project. And then that one did ultimately find a home. Though it wasn't a straightforward path. I've never had the story that you dream of, like of it just, you get the call, they read it over the weekend, they love it. There's, it's always been, I guess, a long journey of keeping the faith at every step. And even when I get to a new step, like, oh, I finally have an agent after years of trying to get an agent. But there's new levels of got to keep working, keep believing. There's no point where you reach a magic bullet, even though I think from the outside it can look like that does happen for some artists. And maybe it does, but it didn't for me.
I think it's pretty special and wonderful that you had the support of your agent through another novel submission round.
Yes.
That's amazing.
No, you're right. It doesn't necessarily always go that way. If one project fails to find a home from both sides, there can be a serious conversation. And actually there was. We did talk about it. She brought it up, actually. Do you want to keep moving forward together? And I felt that she had been a champion of my work in a really faithful and beautiful and supportive way. And she understood my vision and she believed in it. And I wasn't interested in going elsewhere. But we did talk about that.
Yeah. So besides continuing to write and working on your next novel, when that initial novel wasn't accepted, how did you manage your thinking in your mind around writing it, not sort of just get down on yourself about it?
Yeah, there did come a point where I felt I had a real reckoning with whether or not I could keep doing this. And it wasn't after the first novel didn't sell, but it was after the second novel, which was The Mother Act, didn't find a home right away. For a while, it looked like we were starting to reach the end of the list of editors and publishing houses. And it was also 2020. It was not an ideal time. It was summer 2020. Things were a little nuts, as we all know. And so when that was happening, that was when, and I was deep working in a third novel. And I had a point of a couple of months where continuing to get up in the morning and pour my heart and soul and mental and emotional energy into this other novel, which would be potentially the third one that no one in the world was interested in publishing. That was hard because I had reached a point where just the creative process, which had always sustained me, and the act of creation, which was it for many years its own reward. I reached a point where I was realizing that wasn't actually enough. I wanted the work to be received. I wanted it to be read. I felt like I kept, my husband is an actor, so the analogy I used with him was, it's like you're creating a play, you're putting on a play, and you've done all the work, and it's on the stage, and you open the doors, and nobody comes. There's no audience. So have you put on the play? Like, have you created this work of art if there's no audience witnessing it and receiving it? So it reached that point for me then, when it had been months of The Mother Act being on submission, and we were kind of starting to look at, okay, do we take a break from submissions? This is a weird time in the world. Maybe we just need to give it a rest. And I felt like, how do I go on? How do I keep writing novels, which is such a mentally and emotionally and psychically arduous endeavor? And how do I keep showing up with diligence and faith to this? Because it requires faith as well, like faith that what you're making is going to amount to something. You don't know exactly how it's going to pan out. And to have like these examples behind me of these novels that I'd written that were not finding homes, I really had to draw on some very deep wells of my own inner resources, inner belief. Do I still believe in the value of what I'm doing when all external results are pointing to, well, maybe there's not actually value here, apart from my agent who believed in what I was doing and loved my books. So yes, that was, and now I'm not remembering what your original question was, but something along the lines of this, the struggle. Like, how was that hard? It was hard. Yeah, it was hard.
I like what you said about having to have faith in your work to keep on going. That really resonates with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do. And I think if your faith is outsourced, it's not enough. It's very nice to get those stamps of approval from outside, for sure. And it does help, like things like getting grants or having shorter pieces published, in journals or online. All of those things are external approval. That I'm not saying there's not value in that. Of course there is, but when it comes down to it, you have to believe yourself in what you're doing. And I think that was that really became ironclad for me during that period when I did not have and was not getting the external validation and really was having to grapple with, maybe it's never going to happen for me. There are writers and artists who are talented, who are devoted, who work on it, and it just never really happens for them. Maybe I am one of them. And that was hard.
Yeah, that is a hard thought to have to confront. But then everything shifted.
Yeah. I was literally, I've told this story before, but it's kind of a good story, which is that I was on a therapy call with my therapist and weeping about, why can't I get a novel published? Like, I'm in my mid-40s by this point. I have been working toward this goal since I was 8 years old. Like, what is wrong with me? Like bringing it down to that level, because it's so personal. It does feel like it's a judgment on us as people. Like, you are not good enough. Not your book isn't good enough, or books plural, but you are not good enough. And I got off that call and I checked my email, and there was a message from my agent saying an editor at Random House Canada is reading the manuscript and is very interested. And that was the beginning of that tide turning.
Did you cry with happiness?
I did. Yeah, I did. Yeah. And it was after so much rejection and so much what felt like message after message after message of, no, it's not right. It's not. You interpret it as it's not good enough. You're not good enough. After so much of that, it was almost a little bit, what? Like surreal, like hard to wrap your mind around. And they say it only takes one, but it only takes one. And that was the one. And I got this amazing 2-book deal with Random House Canada, worked with an incredible editor on it. And on the basis of that edited manuscript, landed a book deal in the US with Dutton, and they published it simultaneously. So it came out in both countries on the same date with the same gorgeous, gorgeous cover. And so all of these things happened. I mean, there was a New York Times review. It was in People magazine. It was in Chatelaine. Like, all of these big things that, when I reflect back to the self who had to come to that place of, nobody in the external world is saying that they want my work, and I still believe in my work. It's profound and I'm aware of how it looks from the outside, because I have been the person looking at writers going, why do they get reviewed in the New York Times? Why do they get a 2-book deal? But we don't always know, which is why I like to be open about it. We don't always know what the journey has been to get there. Years and years and years of persistence and tenacity and having to be your own inner guiding light when it felt like almost no one else was there for what you were doing, and just showing up to do the work. So it is a pretty beautiful ending of that story. And of course, not the ending, because I'm still actively writing. I'm deep in the next project, and it's still about showing up to the page in the morning and grappling with the creative process and trying to get out of your own way and trying to find the wisdom inside what is unfolding on this page, which you might not entirely understand.
That's such a beautiful story. And I love the idea of just continuously standing up for yourself, because I think it's so easy to be more self-abandoning. And I think a lot of good writers give up on their projects.
I think so. And I think maybe because I, like you, am also a writing coach. And I think maybe more than the lack of external acknowledgement or publications or yeses from the outside, it's giving up on the project because it is really, really hard to sit and be with the murkiness of an evolving creative process and the discomfort of trying to show up for and get to the end of something that can be so unformed and nebulous, and it can really show you to yourself on a level that is sometimes difficult to sit with. Like, there are a lot easier things to do with your time.
Yeah, it's definitely a path to self-discovery for sure.
It is. Yeah, it is.
It's a way to go deeper into your life and your imagination.
I think so.
Yeah. And then the next part of the story is that one of the novels that was rejected is now going to be your second published novel. Can you tell us about that?
It is. Yes, it is. So this is a novel that I had put it aside. It was the one that my agent first read and loved and signed me on the basis of, and I went back to it after the Mother Act was on its way to publication, and I thought, there are reasons this didn't sell, and it's older to me. A younger version of myself is first envisioned it and imagined it, but I read it expecting to find it cringy, and I really loved it. And I felt like I knew what it was about in a way that I had never known before. And also, I could see what was wrong with it. I could see some structural flaws and pacing and tension issues and just ways that it was off. And that came from everything I learned writing the Mother Act and editing, working with my editors on the Mother Act, but also I had been teaching novel writing and have a novel coaching program and worked with a story model more. And I just sort of refashioned it in a way that felt so much clearer after the time and distance and the experience. And so I'm deep in an edit now on that novel, working with the same Random House Canada editor who I worked with on the Mother Act. And it is going to be really different. It's going to be a really different story from what it was before, and so much stronger. It's so beautiful and such a relief to have editorial support and guidance and insight when you've been grappling with something for a really long time. It's been a great experience. And also beautiful to me that this book is going to have a life, that these characters are going to be read and received and known. And that's, I think that's what more can we ask as writers. That's what we desire.
I think I read an early draft of that novel a long time ago, and I loved it then. So I can't wait to see what it's like now after undergoing some marination and some more thought and some editing. It'll be a delight to read.
Thank you. You did. Yes, a much, much earlier draft. You did. It is it is a different thing, but the heart is the same.
So I'm curious, after all the work to get published, you finally got a book deal, and then you went through all the stages of editing, and then your book is coming out into the world. Did you have a moment of any fear around that, or mixed with joy and elation? What were the feelings?
I was aware, even a year or two before publication date, that moving from the private, solitary, internal creative process into my novel as a public product was not only a very different thing, but very much not in my comfort zone. Like, I recognized that I had a certain level of comfort and joy, really, inside the invisibility of where I had been for so many years. Because though I had always been actively working toward the goal of finishing a novel and then publishing that novel and having it read, the publication and the readership elements of that goal actually had a lot inside them that were not what I really wanted subconsciously. Like, I had blocks there that I actively worked on, of visibility blocks, fears of being seen and heard. I had insights about all of the ways I had used my fiction for years, decades, as a place to work out personal issues and questions and things, maybe things in relationships, things from my background, things from my upbringing, things that I didn't feel safe to say in my real life or in my real relationships. And instead, I had this wonderful device of just burying it all inside a fictitious story that no one, read, because I couldn't get published. And so what I had to come to terms with was recognizing that comfort in invisibility and silence, and consciously choosing to step into visibility and using my voice. And those were really big steps for me. And I think they are for a lot of people. I'm going to say, especially women or people with marginalized identities. It's not necessarily always safe, or doesn't feel safe to do that, to, poke your head up above the parapet and say, here I am. Here's what I have made. Here's what I have to offer. And so before I could be thinking about marketing and promotion and publicity, and even just having it available on bookstore shelves, I had to do a lot of inner work. And I did. And I was fortunate enough to have support in that. And I think maybe it's something we don't talk a lot about in publishing and in writing, and actually putting your work, and almost every novel, no matter what it is, and memoir, of course, also, it has a lot of yourself in it. It doesn't have to be autobiographical to have a lot of yourself in it. It's your preoccupations. It's your subconscious, murky, compost material that you've dredged up and used. And so I did have a lot of needing to find tools to help myself feel supported through that, so that I didn't go through the whole publication process feeling like I just, wanted to just dive under the covers and hide from it all, which some days I did want to do.
It's such a contradiction, because you spend so many years wanting to be seen and heard, and then the moment that you have an opportunity to be seen and heard, it's frightening.
It's frightening. And yeah, it's deep.
It is deep. So what are some of the tools you use to move through that phase?
Well, I did a group coaching program called Visibility Medicine, and I have to call that out. It's run by a woman named Danielle Cohen, and I learned a lot. One of the tools I learned there is about developing a relationship with something called a competent protector, which is used in some kinds of attachment and trauma work, but it's just a relationship with an imaginary human or animal, or it can be a tree, it can be an eagle, who you trust to have your back as you're going into circumstances where you feel confronted or maybe unsafe. And just because we feel like we have to do it all, like we feel like it's our issue. I just have to, be more confident. And so you're trying to just pull up your bootstraps and be more confident and do the thing. And so the idea of a competent protector is that it's something or someone you can call on in a like visualization, meditation kind of sense, where you know that they're going to be there for you and you're not alone. It's not just you. And also, I think just the understanding that if you feel unsafe speaking and being seen and having your work out there, it's not necessarily a you problem. Like, there is actually an inherent unsafety in that. If you look at Goodreads reviews, some of them are vicious. If you see the way women, and certainly writers don't necessarily usually achieve high levels of prominence and visibility, most of them, but certainly women in other, in music or in film or TV, we see, or in politics, certainly, like we see how it is unsafe for women and people with marginalized identities to speak their opinions or to have their work seen or to step up with authority. Like, we see on social media how they get attacked or torn down, or, so it's not that I thought I was going to be facing that level, but there are also some controversial things in my book. And so it just, even if it's like on a public scale or a more personal scale, like what are my aunts going to think? Things like that. It's a little bit like inviting everyone to read your diary. It's like, here it is. This came from me. Here you go.
Right. It is big. It is big. But I think the feedback that you've had on the novel has been overwhelmingly positive, hasn't it?
It has. Yes, it has. And I have chosen not to really engage with anything that's not. There was one review that my team very kindly protected me from early on. And there was about a day where we mistakenly thought it was the New York Times, and it was very like a sort of bad faith, didn't get the book takedown. And I was a little not thrilled that it was the most influential news outlet in the world, arguably, that was doing this, but I felt okay that somebody was doing it. And then it turned out it wasn't the New York Times. It was something else with the word New York in it, but it was not New York Times book review. So, and I eventually did read it, but by the time I did, it really did roll off my back. And I think that's to do with having done so much work to understand that I did what I set out to do. Like, I love the book and I made the book that I wanted to make. And so if somebody doesn't like it, it is not for them. And that's okay. It's really okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's the big lesson I had to learn, that you just have to accept that your work and you are not for everybody. Not everybody's going to get it. And there's many other people that will. So something good to remember.
Yes.
And I read the book and I love the book. The book is called The Mother Act. And it's a beautiful book, right down to the structure, which is structured like a play, because the characters in the book are actors. Yes. What was your initial story idea when you first started thinking and dreaming of the book? What was your original concept for it?
Well, it did come to me, the idea with that structure. The structure was always there. My initial idea came when I was really struggling in the early days of motherhood and entertaining. I have to be careful when I say this, but sort of like having ideas of what if I could go back to the person I used to be and the life I used to have, because it was so hard to have given up what felt like everything, my identity, the way I spent my days, my freedom, my bodily autonomy, to care for these young dependent beings. And immediately having that thought, the next thought was, well, if I did that, like if I walked out and tried to go back to who I used to be, what happens to my daughters? So I from the very beginning was interested in exploring this dual narrative of a mother and a daughter. The mother, this is not a spoiler, the mother leaves when the daughter is a toddler and is in and out of her life then as she becomes an adult over the years. And so the idea was an opening night or a night. I don't think I knew the opening night, like the first moment I had this idea, but it came pretty quickly that there's a play that the mother is putting on exploring their relationship. And by the end of the night, they're going to see each other again after some period of estrangement. And what I didn't know was what would be inside the portions of the story that are the play unfolding on the stage. I had sort of the framework, but it took me a while to know what were the right parts of the story to tell and how to create propulsion because you're going in and out of time. You have, certain important things right up front. And then how do you create suspense when the reader already knows the outcome? And just all of those questions became very tricky as I was going along. And at one point, in fact, I abandoned the book because I thought the structure as I had envisioned it was not possible, that it just was not viable. But it turned out that it was because I hadn't found the right pieces of the story to focus on.
That's beautiful. I'm so glad that you stuck with it because I love this book. It's one of my favorite books of the year.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. I'm thrilled to hear that.
And I think one of the things that propels the reader through the book is like the depth of the characters. I really thought that the characters are so detailed in a way that they felt real and multidimensional. So nobody's all bad and nobody's all good either. Everybody has flaws and secrets and different motivations that slowly reveal themselves through the novel. I was wondering how you managed to paint such deep and multidimensional characters.
They are so complex, and they were not that complex in the first draft. I mean, I was going into it, so I think it's a layering process, right? Deeper and deeper. But going into it right off the bat, I have a mother who abandons her daughter. So our conception of that character is bad, right? And we have the daughter who has been abandoned. So that is like usually the heroic character, the character we're going to empathize with, sympathize with. And I had set myself a challenge of making each of these people multidimensional and hoping by the end of the book for the reader to have an experience in which the mother, that they wouldn't necessarily say, yeah, I would do the same thing in her circumstance, but that they would understand who she was and why she had made the choices that she made. But then there was so much along the way to finesse around who they each are as people. Also, there's the husband and father character is very important as well, and a big character. And I was worried by the end of the second draft. I felt like he was just too good. He was unbelievable as a too much of a nice guy. And then as I wrote more and went deeper in subsequent drafts, and certainly with help from my editors, I uncovered like, oh, there are ways that he has like totally let down his daughter, or ways that he has been manipulative or not, just doesn't get it. And so he emerged as a much more complex character than he was in the first draft or two. And I think if you're writing, I'll speak from my own experience, if I am writing with an intention of empathy for these people, even people who have done things that I wouldn't do or think I wouldn't do, or that that don't feel like the right choices, or even people who are very different temperamentally from me. My goal is to be in their skin and be living their lives from inside their heads. And so I think if you're doing that, and then if you're doing that with more than one character, because there's 2 points of view in the story, you're going to end up eventually, after drafts and drafts and layers with characters, I hope that who are pretty multi-dimensional, because human beings are.
Yeah, that's why the characters resonate so much, because they seem like real people that I would know. Yeah. What was the editorial process like on the book? Was it comprehensive or light, or how would you describe it?
I would not use the word light. It was very comprehensive, and I am grateful for it. It was a very good experience, and also not easy. Also because the way that the book deals happened, I worked with my Canadian editor first. We did a substantive edit that was not light. I say that, but there's nothing huge that changed in the plot or in what happens or in the story. It was just deepening and sharpening and clarifying and filling in some gaps and going deeper into, she just would ask questions, or a lot of questions from her that would just open up a whole other world to me of, okay, and maybe it wasn't even her intention, but she would ask a question and I would realize this scene needs to be doing an entirely different thing, or we need a new scene to fill in a gap here that I didn't realize was there. So I did the substantive edit, and then I'm pretty sure there was another round of that, sort of deepening and cleaning up other issues that arose with all the changes that I made in that substantive edit. And then she did a line edit, which was very detailed and possibly the most painful. And then my agent sent it out in the US to see if we could get a US deal. And we did. And the editor who acquired was Lexi Casola at Dutton. And so when I had the conversation with her before she acquired the book, and she said, I love the book, and I have just a few ideas for ways we can, and I was like, no, it's all done. We have done it. We have finished the edit. And she just brought this whole new level of, a fresh eye. And because we had cleared so much, the book was so tight that she could just focus on really detailed, deep stuff, which I think is part of why the characters in the story are so complex and layered and nuanced and all of that, because of the way this editorial process worked. Because then I went in and opened up the body on the operating table yet again and made some pretty big additions and rearrangements and based on what she had seen. And that was actually, once I got over my surely I don't need to do more work on this kind of feeling. It was a really beautiful experience because both editors were in conversation, and they would send me the manuscript. There'd be comments from both of them, and it would be this 3-way conversation on the manuscript and really going deep into why is she saying this, and where is this coming, and what does this connect with over what she says on page 280. And so just asking me again to think really deeply about this already pretty deep story. And so it was robust. Yeah.
It sounds like it was robust, but also kind of a wonderful experience, because my favorite kind of editing is just that kind of editing where there's a question asked and it's a conversation. It's not necessarily super prescriptive or asking you to write a different book. It's somebody coming in and understanding and seeing these characters in the story.
It's such a privilege. It's so beautiful when the visions are aligned, right? And they always were. It was always in service of the book and the vision that I had for it. And even when there was a suggestion or a question that I initially didn't agree with, or felt frustrated because I thought, like, you're not getting it. But it was, as I thought about it based on what had been asked or said, I could see, oh, it actually isn't clear on the page, or I'm trying to do something that isn't quite working. How can we make it work? And then the result is something that is so much clearer and deeper and better than was there originally. And I think it is a real gift to have that kind of editorial experience. And I've heard from writers who say, editors don't edit anymore, and they feel like they're not sure about the product that's being put out because of that. And that was not my experience at all. And I can't speak for other places, but I was very robustly edited.
And it's a beautiful book, and it's got a beautiful cover too. The gorgeous cover.
The cover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, thinking back on our whole conversation and your whole publishing journey, I would say that your experience speaks to the amount of patience it requires to be a novelist, and also the amount of depth you need to be prepared to go into to be a novelist. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. Yeah. Patience, depth. I think it has to feel like a calling and like something that you have to do, because it does require all of you for so long. But it's also a beautiful thing, because it's also personal growth. It's relational. It's all of you.
Mm-hmm. And understanding life so much more through your characters and writing, and then talking about their experiences with editors and readers. It's kind of all a beautiful practice.
It's a beautiful practice. I don't really look at it as a separate thing from my personal growth, from my personal life, from my relationships. I mean, I used to more, I think, and I think it has become, if I sit down to a writing session and I'm kind of doing morning page type writing about something that I'm thinking about in my own life, I don't count that as not writing. Even if I'm not working on the novel, I have come to know that what I go through in my personal life and my thoughts and my emotions, it's all of a piece, because my work is thinking and reading and being and growing and grappling. Like, you can't separate out those strands.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about today?
Oh, let me think. I think we've covered so much of this journey and what it means. And I guess because your listeners are writers and aspiring writers and people showing up to the page. And I mean, what I would most want to say is just that this is a beautiful and worthwhile thing to be devoting yourself to. And if it's is what you want to be doing, and what that's all you need in terms of permission, or the value is it has so much value. It's not a frivolous practice. It's something that comes up sometimes in the people who I coach. It feels frivolous to devote themselves to a creative practice, and I would say it's quite the opposite.
I totally agree with that too. Did you have a quote or a writing practice or an idea that you wanted to leave the audience with?
Yes, there's something that I do at the start of every writing session, which is basically just writing down my intention for the day, which in simple terms, and in the present tense, today I am immersing in the scene where Carl returns. And I'm doing it with ease and flow and presence. And I put that part on because so often we sit down to write and it's sort of the opposite. This is going to be hard. I am doing this grudgingly. I'm confused. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I shouldn't write today. And so we're quite practiced at that negative voice. And sometimes that is the reality. It is hard. We are confused. We don't know what we're doing. And so I like to just flip that and put ease, flow, presence, and to write it down. And then that's usually the first sentence that I write is something to that effect. I often speak in we language. So we are writing this scene. We need to think about this part of the story or what if we did this? And I think it's that thing similar to the competent protector. I'm not in this alone. I have help. And that makes a difference.
I love that so much. It's amazing. Where can people find you online on your website and on Instagram and other places?
Yes. So I am online at HeidiReimer.com. Reimer is REI. Heidi is HEI. And I have a Substack newsletter. It is at HeidiReimer.substack.com. It's called The Visibility Letters. And then I'm also at Instagram at Heidi.c.Reimer. And I'm fairly active in most of those places. The newsletter comes out twice a month, and that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Heidi. That was a beautiful interview, and I think the listeners will love it as much as I did. Thank you so much.
I really love talking with you, Suzanne. This is good. We went to some deep places.
We did. I loved it. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're getting the Stardust and Courage newsletter. Sign up by visiting my site at SuzanneAnder.com, and be sure to tell your friends about this podcast too. I hope this episode inspires you to practice patience with your writing and believe in your work no matter what. What you have to say is valuable, and the world needs your perspective. And remember, publishing takes as long as it takes. Keep going. Sending you stardust and courage. Until next time.